Hi everyone, this is Julie Martinez-Hayes. I'm your assistant professor for NOS230 at Wake Tech. We're going to do a custom lab together. It is the lab in Module 6 about printing, and the custom lab is going to assign a printer using group policy. I will be using the same document you have in Blackboard, which is this basic Word document in front of me. I'm going to slide this aside so you can see my screen a little bit better. Move Camtasia over. Okay, well, what I've done so far is, let me minimize this. I have gone to MindTap in Cengage. I've opened lab 4-2, which is the lab that manages Active Directory groups and OUs, where you create a lot of objects there. We're not going to follow the lab instructions, but we will need the domain controller. Let me just get the screen out of the way. Though we actually don't need this. The domain controller I have already booted up, and I have my VMs set to boot pop up in a separate window. That's in your live VM settings. So this full monitor you see is the domain controller, and it's a remote session into the domain controller. All right, first step, there are a few steps involved with this lab. First, you have to create the objects, the OU, the new users, and the group. All right, then you have to create a policy. So you'll make a policy that actually assigns a printer. Actually, before that, we have to make a printer. So step by step, we're going to make the OU and the users, then we'll make a printer, then we'll do the policy that puts everything together. After this group policy is made and linked to the OU that we create, then we power on the client. I don't want to power on the client too soon because we'll just end up having to reboot it. It's a lot easier if it starts up fresh when the policy already exists and is already applied to the client. All right, so step A, we create users and an OU. Now when I rewrite this lab, I'm going to make sure we make the OU first, and then we can make the users directly into the OU. For now, I've got make the user that's named after myself. We can right-click up on the domain or in the OU where we want it to go. Either way, the user will show up in a container called users. All right, I'm going to call this Julie Martinez-Hayes. Labs are slow tonight. Log on will be Julie. And I have PA $W0RD. And we uncheck this box. I just use the spacebar to uncheck it. We uncheck the box that says user must change password at next logon. This is not something we would do in the real world at all. We would force the user to change the password because as IT professionals and technicians, we never should know the password of the user. And then we will make another one, and you can copy the user you just made. If it's not showing up, you can refresh it. That's odd. It shouldn't be in there. It should be in users. That's my fault. I created it in the wrong place. New user, you can type in your best friend. I'm going to put Sherry. You can have any two users you want. You just have to remember who they are and how to log in as them. I do this all by keyboard. I've been making users for so long that it's much faster to use the keyboard shortcuts. All right, now that we have the two users, we make an OU, and we make it inside ADUC, which is Active Directory Users and Computers. And I thought we had made it inside of something. Nope, it's right at this level. The top level. It isn't a sub OU, it's just an OU. Call it NOS230. Oops, I just made a typo. Could feel the typo as I was hitting enter. 232 is a different class. Alright, so we've got two users and an OU. Now we put those parts together. We move the two users into the OU. It reminds us that moving an object could be it's not so much unsafe, it just was warning us that the OU that it's leaving had policies on it or could have policies on it, and the OU that you're moving the object into would have different policies, and that could mess up life for the user. Alright, so if you've got two people, we're going to create a group. This is a global security group, which is the default, and we're calling it NOS230 group. That's all there is to it. Alright, now for this lab, because it is a policy that affects the computer, we need to drag the computer object into our OU. There. So that is actually our first snip. We want to see the OU, organizational unit, plus two users. You can tell that they're users. The security group, and the computer. There. And that's the snip we need. So you can take a snip of this. I'll just paste it into my document to delete later. Alright, now we make a printer. We don't need Active Directory users and computers anymore, but we might need it in a little bit. We can get to it from this icon at the bottom. We can get there from settings. We can search settings for printers, but it's also under system. Nope, I'm sorry, devices. I hardly ever get there the slow way. I almost always just hit search and go to printers. I also tend to have the printer print queues and their status in my taskbar so that I can see them turn red or see them basically they will let me know if the print queue has an issue. Alright, we're going to add a printer and we're going to let it scan, but it will not find one. So we need that little link that says the printer that I want isn't listed. That's the link we click on. Now this is the older design window, but it lets us choose print queues that already exist on a server somewhere, or find one in the directory by name, add the IP address, and for this case we're just going to use the manual settings and pretend it's a local printer. So we're keeping LPT1, even though that's not normally the case. For smaller offices you might have physical printers connected to one server, and that one server may be your file server, your print server, and your domain controller all at once. So we'll keep this. We're going to find a Microsoft printer, although I would never purchase one. I'm a Hewlett-Packard printer person. And we'll pick the Microsoft-XPS class driver 2. And for now we're going to leave the default name, but we will be changing it. We are not going to try to print We do not want to share it. Turn off sharing. We will be sharing this later. Do not print the test page because there is no print device connected. We just have the printer, which is a software definition of printer. That's the Microsoft version. That a printer is actually not the hunk of plastic. The printer is the software that creates the queue. Alright, so we refresh and we see our printer. Alright, so all we need is a snip showing our new printer is the default. You can ignore the fact that it's still scanning. So your new snip is just showing that it's there by default and it exists. That's what we want to know. Minimize that. Now we go to manage. We're going to manage this and make some changes. Now be careful, there are two words here that have properties. One is the hardware properties, one is the printer properties. We want the printer part. Alright, most of the work we do to set this up for the users is all on this interface, which is again an older design, but we're going to set it up. First we can rename it. On the General tab, we change the printer name itself to our first name and possessive S, printer, Julie's printer. Use your own first name, please. For location, we're going to put it in my office. This part you actually have to do. 3210. And the comment, you can just point out that it's the NOS230 groups printer. Alright, that part is done. We're going to go over to the sharing tab. And for the sharing tab, yes, we're going to share it. You don't want special characters or a space in your share name, so it's better to wipe this out and put, just rewrite it. Make sure there's no space. NOS230 printer. It also helps that the share name has a little bit more detail and explanation to it. Alright, this is the key part though. The list in directory is what allows users in Active Directory to see it. That share is actually an object in Active Directory, so we want to make sure it's published and listed and visible, not hidden and secret. By having it listed, users would be able to search for their own printers and find it. Okay, so we want a snip of the sharing tab. We'll go ahead and take a snip of your NOS230 printer, and I'll put video in here so you can't take the snip here. Alright. Actually, I don't want to keep that. On the security tab, let's move the security tab here. We're going to add the NOS230 group and check names to make sure. If for some reason the name doesn't check, make sure that groups is checked here. The object type for groups is checked. And this group is going to get permissions that are a little bit limited. Print and manage. The one benefit of managing a printer is that they can delete print jobs submitted by other people. What they can't do is add users and change security. Okay, so the other thing was to add our own name and give all three permissions. Notice that the highest level permission here is manage the printer, but it's not in order of increased permissions. It's like 132. So just be aware of that they're not listed in order, in increasing order of ability to do anything. Alright, so we're going to take a snip of the security tab, but with your own name highlighted so that the permissions below show the ones for you. take a snip of this and paste that in your document. And you can pause this video whenever you want to do this work. Next up is the group policy. All right, to get to group policy to begin with, we're going to open the Tools menu, Group Policy Management. And I'm just going to, oops, that's not the one I wanted to minimize. There. Now we have the Group Policy Console, the Management Console up. The first thing to do is to create a new object. This is where all objects get held with the actual object itself. If you see objects in other OUs, they're actually links. Just right click and make a new GPO, Group Policy Object, and we're going to call it Assign Printer. Now in the real world you'd want something, oh, arrow, shush. In the real world you'd want something a little more descriptive, like Assign NOS230 Group Printer, and that way you would have you'd have a little more clarity what it's doing. Alright, so first thing to do actually is to create settings. So to put settings in an group policy object, because right now it's not doing anything. We're going to edit what settings it's managing, and we get the group policy editor. Now, group policy editor is a bit of a rabbit hole. You've got a computer section, a computer hive, and a user hive. So you've got totally different sections, but within those you'll have policies and preferences, and when each of the preferences you've got similar settings. So it might sound like you've got the exact same setting for both the computer and the user, but in truth it's not exactly the same. What it does and how it works either affects the user and any machine they're on, or it affects the user, it affects the computer and all users who log on to that computer. Okay, so you've got approaching things at slightly different angles. But we want this printer to stick with the computer itself. You want to drill into computer configuration, preferences, control panel settings, and then printers. And the box should change a little bit. It would change to a blue window. There are no printers set here. We're going to right click in some empty space, choose new, which is the top option, and local printer. This is going to make the printer local to the user, and what it's going to do is map the share, the print share that we created. Alright, now if the default says update, we can change that to create, although if the policy refreshes, if someone deletes a printer, it's nice to have this update and add it back on. Alright, we're going to change the name here, NOS230, put a space, and call it copier. That way when we see the policy in effect, the printer name itself is different than our share. Okay, so that's how we'll know here that the policy is working, that someone didn't just map it by way of the share. Alright, for port is the next box. There's a little drop down arrow to the right. Choose LPT1. Printer path has an ellipsis next to it, and the ellipsis goes to our whole directory. And here's where that list in directory comes in handy. We see the printer and we hit OK. That's our printer. We have the ability to add some additional information here. So you can add details as to where it is, what it is, location, Julie's office, comment, NOS230 group printer. Hit apply. Before you exit this, you want to hit apply, then OK. You have made edits to this policy. There is no save button. You just close the Group Policy Management Editor window. This editor is live, so when you have changes, as soon as you click on it, you've made them. Now we have a policy that's actually doing something. Alright. we're going to change something on the scope tab. I'm going to slide this up a little. We're going to just to be sure this policy gets assigned quickly to the user and computer involved, we're going to go ahead and add the test user that we make, which will be the Julie user. And then we're going to add, we can't add a second one, you have to hit add again. We're going to add the printer, sorry, the computer name. And it was Win10. Now if we try to do check, it won't work because the object type is not checked for computers. So go back, check the object type for computers, make sure it is searching objects of this type for that name that you just typed in. Oh, it's going to be plab win something. Plab Win10, I think. There we go. And they're attached. Alright, so it wants to see the GPO and that we've had it. One thing I really want to show you here is the settings. That's going to be another snip though. Okay, so for now the first scope will be just this scope tab. What you're going to do is include the assigned printer name, so I know what the name of the GPO is, and you're going to include the security filtering section to make sure I can see your username and the computer name, and that will be your snip. Alright. I think I missed a snip though, didn't I? Alright, I missed a snip for section E on 12. The scope setting is important and I need to see it. What the lab asks for is actually more important. The settings tab is how other IT folks see what you have done in your policy. So when we come in, we're usually not the ones who actually wrote these GPOs. We're editing them, we're troubleshooting them, we're trying to figure out what in the heck our predecessor was thinking. And the settings tab is really what tells us what's going on, because you can call it whatever you want, but I need to see the settings of what that policy is actually trying to do. So one thing we'll need to do is refresh the policy to make sure the settings can show. There's a quick link over on the right that says show all. That's the first thing I start with, and then usually I hide the general portion, which just confirms which domain I'm on, and it confirms what security filtering is going on. But if I want to see what the policy is doing, you can hide the general portion and go down to either the computer section or the user section. And this one is showing us that is assigning a printer called NOS230 copier. It's using LPT1, the share path, and it shows us what location we've given. So this is kind of the meat and potatoes of what is this policy really doing. This is the snip that you should put in for section E, step 12 of your lab. You can pause here while you take care of this. There's no deduction for 2 snips. Keep each of those snips. I'm going to have to edit the lab for future users, but I'll make sure we include one that has the scope and one that has the settings. Now on to section G. This policy, although it has settings and it's got a name and it has an explanation, isn't doing squat for any of the users, and it isn't affecting any of the computers. And the reason is it's not linked. So we can see where it's going and what it's linked to. So on the scope tab near the top, it'll tell you what OUs and what groups and what domains it's linked to, whether it's enforced, and whether that link is even turned on right now. You can actually toggle a policy off and just turn it off. There are a couple of ways to link a policy. One is to just drag it on top of the OU. One is to create it on top in the OU to begin with. You can right-click your OU and say create a GPO and link it. The other option is to create it, the GPO first and then link it. So we right-click our OU, link to an existing GPO, and we find it and go there. So now in the group policy objects container, we see our policies there, we see that the link is enabled, and it's all ready to go. Now that it's linked, we should be able to power on the workstation and get a result. So just before you leave here, make sure you get a snip of the scope tab and a separate snip of the printing tab, the settings tab, so we can see what the printer's doing. Settings is more important, but scope is important for this lab. Now we can power down this whole window. We're going to power on the minimize that window, and we're going to power on the Windows 10 computer. Sorry, it's past my bedtime when I'm recording this, and I'm a little tired. Coffee will help. Alright, while this boots up, it's going to be take a little bit longer than it might have taken in previous labs because it's got new policies. So it's downloading information, it's mapping connections to that printer. It's doing a little bit more work. Because it's set to auto login, it already put us in as the administrator. So we have to log out as administrator. The key here is to turn off auto login, which is this key icon at the upper right. That forces us to put in credentials. And I will try to sign out as the administrator. And Control-Alt-Delete to sign back in. I'm going to sign in as the user Julie. Yeah, it will disconnect because this is a remote session you're using. So when you log off as administrator, you just broke the remote session. I'll use other user in the lower left. You're already showing the practice labs domain, so I should just have to put in Julie. And hope that I don't put any typos. There we go. Okay, this is a brand new user on this computer, so it's going to take a moment to create the local profile, add any group settings. The computer settings should have already been assigned when it was booting up. And at this point, it's just applying user settings at the domain level, OU level, and the local cell settings. Now we want to go to settings and go see what printers we have. Ah, we got prompts in the background. Hang on, I forgot to mention the prompts. You can agree to the license and do not install the client software it wants to add. Let's go see our printers. Devices. And it's not there. Wait. Devices and printers. There we go. Devices and scanners. I saw it. Did you see that? Bluetooth and other devices. It was listed here. NOS230 copier. It wasn't set to default, but it's there. And if you're looking at the printers and scanners option, you do see the NOS230 copier, which is fabulous. It means our policy worked. So go ahead and take a snip here, but we're going to need one more thing, and that is proof of who is logged in. To make sure it worked for the user Julie, I need to see that you're logged in as that user. And I want to show you a quick trick. The PowerShell, the command prompt trick. When you open a command prompt, it shows your new username, so you can see that it says Julie right here. And it's close enough to where I want it. This way you can align the three things that the SNP needs, which is I need to see the VM name, I need to see your user, and I need to see the copier, right? So I need this. Ugh, I need that messy. This and this. There we go. That's the last SNP. So that's it. You made a policy, you proved that it was connected, you linked it, you made all those Active Directory objects, and you have it working. So congratulations. Let me know, email me if you have any problems with this lab. Thank you.